Ah yes, time to meet the emotion who's perpetually at the control panel in my head. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about Pixar's 28th feature film, 2024's coming-of-age fantasy comedy, Inside Out 2. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Inside Out 2 stars the vocal talents of Amy Poehler, Maya Hawke, and Phyllis Smith, and was directed by Kelsey Mann. Set 1 year after Inside Out, it tells the story of 13-year-old Riley and her emotions as both prepare for the emotional changes brought on by puberty. Creating interesting, emotionally impactful films is nothing new for Pixar. For nearly 30 years now, they've been releasing creative, thematically complex stories that appeal to and affect audiences of all ages. Crying at a Pixar movie has become the norm, because these films are designed not only to entertain, but also to impact you, to touch you with relatable, moving themes. These themes have come in all sorts of forms over the years, but those related to coming of age have always seemed to be among the most impactful. So perhaps unsurprisingly, the emotion-driven and universally relatable coming of age themes in Pixar's 2015 Inside Out stand among the studio's best. Sequels seem to be a bit of an inevitability these days, and outside of the Toy Story franchise, Pixar sequels have been met with very mixed opinions. None of these stories have ever needed a sequel, but if there had ever been a Pixar movie perfectly suited for one, it was Inside Out. It had a concept and set of characters that could be applied to any number of situations or life stages, so it's only natural that we got another one, picking up with a now 13-year-old Riley at the onset of puberty. Like many of the best Pixar films, Inside Out was able to craft a creative and complex world in which to tell its story. It was a movie that had to take countless intangible concepts, like memories, emotions, and the imagination, and turn them into tangible physical things through some of the studio's best and most innovative world building to date. Inside Out 2 inhabits this same world, and certainly benefits from the extensive groundwork laid by its predecessor, but it continues to expand upon it in fun and creative ways. Aging and Riley's transition into adolescence has added a bit more complexity to her emotional and personality makeup, but the world building here keeps it all simple to follow and instantly recognizable. Concepts as complex and existential as a belief system and one's sense of self are crafted with as much ease as the entertaining concepts, like the stream of consciousness, secret vault, connotation-changing sarcasm, and desolate back of the mind. Just as with the first Inside Out, this world building wouldn't be nearly as significant if it weren't also for the characters that inhabit that world. Again, this sequel benefits a good deal from the character groundwork laid in the first film. We already know Riley's 5 core emotions, and so this movie's able to jump right into the story this time around. Of our original 5 characters, Joy is once again the main character, and the one with the biggest arc, but sadness, anger, fear, and disgust feel a little bit more balanced this time around, contributing nearly as much to the adventure within Riley's mind. But along with the expanded world building, we also see an expanded cast of emotion characters, thanks to puberty, including anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui, or wee-wee as Joy calls her, the boredom emotion. We also occasionally briefly see one other emotion, but I'm not going to spoil that here for you. These new characters add some interest, humor, and complexity to the mix, especially with regard to their interactions with the existing emotions. They each contribute to the story a bit, but just like Joy is the clear main character of the original emotions, anxiety is the lead of the new emotions. Once again, we've got a split story, one that occurs both within Riley's mind and outside of her mind in the real world. The adventure within the mind sees Joy and the rest of the original emotional crew traveling across the mind to retrieve an important part of Riley before it's too late. If that sounds a little familiar, you'd be correct. There are a number of differences here, and getting a chance to explore the world building within the mind is always a delight, but the familiarity does put this adventure a step or two below that of the originals. Luckily, the out-of-mind real-world story is expanded upon here. Riley feels more like an actual character this time, rather than just a vessel being piloted. There's more characterization to her, and she has more to do here. Again, like with the first movie, we're not talking about some big crazy adventure that she goes on or anything. What she experiences is very normal everyday stuff. She goes away for the weekend to a hockey camp. But all the while, starting puberty, worrying about losing her friends, trying to make a good impression on her coach, and most of all, trying to fit in with the kids she likes, looks up to, and thinks are cool. All classic, normal, teen coming-of-age stuff, but that's what makes it work so well. It is ordinary, and so it's relatable. Along the same lines, Inside Out 2 is another impactful and thematically strong addition to the Pixar filmography. With a predecessor like Inside Out, this probably comes as no surprise to anybody, especially since this sequel is an expansion on many of the same concepts. In fact, just like with the Within Mind story, there are a number of thematic similarities between the two films. Once again, one of the big main takeaways here is that all of the emotions need to work together. They need to help each other, but also keep each other in check. You can't suppress or hide the seemingly negative emotions and memories, because they serve an important role in making you you. All of this is expressed in a slightly different way here, but it's familiar, doubling down on the themes and lessons of the first movie. But we do see some thematic expansion here too, thanks to the relatable tumultuousness of puberty. The new emotions, the hard-to-control overreactions, the fluctuating beliefs and sense of self, the feelings of self-doubt and that you're not good enough. The film makes a point to show that these are all normal things to feel and experience, but that they can also be controlled, so they don't fundamentally change who you are. There are a lot of thematic components and relatable aspects to this movie, but the thing I was most struck by and impressed by was the film's handling of anxiety. Like sadness, anxiety is an emotion that almost always carries with it negative connotations. In general, we view it as a bad thing, something to hide or get over, but this movie treats anxiety as the complex emotion that it actually is. At its core, anxiety is meant to protect us. Like fear, it keeps us situationally aware and tries to stave off pain, just future potential pain. It's an emotion that serves a useful purpose, but can easily get out of control and become a problem that unintentionally does more harm than good. And again, like with the world building and other emotion characters, Pixar nails that tangible representation here. We get to see how anxiety can take over and paralyze you by blocking out your other emotions, how it can use your own imagination against you, and how it can change who you are if you're not careful. This movie features a panic attack, and I've got to say, this was one of the best visual representations of the concept that I've ever seen. I mean, this is right up there with Soul's personified depiction of what depression is. So, for this panic attack, we see it both inside and out. We see the actual attack, Riley flushed and breathing hard, panicking and scared and trying to cling to anything but getting sucked into herself. But then we also see the internal manifestation of the attack, what anxiety, the character, is doing, and how that's affecting everything else in the control room of Riley's mind. It sounds silly to say, but there's something comforting about having a visual like this to think of, because bizarrely, it really does capture the internal feeling of a panic attack. So it's one of those things that adults and people with anxiety issues can look at and point to knowingly, but I think it's also useful to people who don't necessarily know. Whether we're talking about a kid or teen who just hasn't experienced it yet, or an adult who's somehow managed to get through life without experiencing it, this movie does a great job of showing that it's a normal thing that happens, and that even though it can be scary and overwhelming, there are ways to get past and overcome it. And that's just a huge thing to have a movie acknowledge and say, especially one aimed at teens. Like the first Inside Out, this sequel is another universal and resonant film. No matter who you are, you're gonna be able to relate to this, either personally or via your own kids. Maybe you were never a teenage girl. Maybe you never went away to hockey camp or ended up at a new school without your friends. Maybe you've never had a panic attack. All these things combine to make for a seemingly specific story, but when looked at individually, they're incredibly relatable. You know how emotionally confusing and tumultuous puberty is. You know how it feels to want to desperately fit in and not be alone or viewed as an outsider. And even if you don't struggle with persistent anxiety, you know what it feels like to be anxious about something. Inside Out 2 might not be quite as creative or emotionally hard-hitting as the first movie, but it's still one that would be difficult not to connect with. I know I still teared up with this one, and there was sniffling and sobbing throughout the theater, so I wasn't the only one to feel it. I realize that people seem to often have generally negative opinions about sequels, and Inside Out 2 is a slight step down from its predecessor, at least on this initial viewing. But I, for one, hope we get more of these movies, because I would love to see some more of Riley's journey through life. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. The biggest pro has got to be the film's handling of anxiety. I really liked nearly all of the film's thematic components, even those recycled and repurposed from the first movie, but anxiety was something all its own here. I think this movie did a great job of not only acknowledging that anxiety does have a purpose, but also of tangibly personifying the emotion and its destructive capabilities if it gets out of control. The visual representation of the panic attack was a thing of anxious beauty, and I'm so glad we've got a movie that shows something like that in the way that it does, because I think it's extremely useful, both to people who have anxiety and to those who don't. Pro number 2 is the world building. This was one of my favorite aspects of the first movie, and remains one of my favorites for the sequel as well. That original movie did a lot of heavy lifting, laying the groundwork for tons of the creative concepts that we see in this movie as well. Because it starts from this existing base, Inside Out 2 inherently feels a bit less creative with the world building, but it still expands on it a good deal. Following in its predecessor's footsteps, this movie continues to take difficult to describe intangible concepts and turns them into easy to understand and recognize tangible things. Concepts like a belief system or a person's sense of self. Some of this stuff is deep, while other aspects of the world building fall to the fun side of the spectrum, like the stream of consciousness and the sarcasm. On the con side, my issues are just minor nitpicks. There are aspects of this movie that feel overly familiar, and a bit too similar to the first movie. I really loved that first movie, so retreading a few things isn't the end of the world to me, but there was definitely a bit of repetition here with regard to some of the film's takeaway messages and the basic plot beats of the adventure within Riley's mind. And as part of that adventure, I'd be remiss not to mention Bloofy and Pouchy on the cons. They weren't awful. I mean, I get it. I get the reference. I get why it's funny. I like the variation in the animation style. They just spent a little too much time on the gag, and it made that part of the internal adventure drag a bit. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Inside Out 2 or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them, if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Inside Out 2 4 out of 5 paws. While not quite as creative or emotional as its predecessor, Inside Out 2 is another fun and resonant journey to the center of the mind, with exciting world-building expansions, heartfelt coming-of-age themes, and a profoundly mature handling of the concept of anxiety. I would recommend Inside Out 2 to just about anybody. Like the first Inside Out, this is a movie that is near universally relatable, so it shouldn't be discounted because it's animated or because it's a sequel. If you disliked the first movie, this one probably won't win you over, but if you enjoyed the first, this will likely affect you just as much. Again, teens and parents of teens will get a lot out of this movie, but anybody who's ever struggled with anxiety will also likely connect with this film on a very deep level. If you liked Inside Out 2, I would recommend Turning Red. This is another good coming-of-age Pixar film that focuses on puberty. Rather than dealing exclusively with internal emotions, it takes a more metaphorical route by telling the story of a 13-year-old girl who turns into a giant red panda when she feels strong emotions. If you liked the world building here, you should check out Soul. This is another Pixar movie that does an excellent job of taking intangible concepts and personifying them in a tangible way. The way Inside Out 2 deals with Riley's panic attack really reminded me of the way that Soul represents and handles the concept of depression. And if you'd like to step away from Pixar and animation, you might want to watch 8th Grade. This is another story about a young teenage girl as she transitions from middle school to high school. It touches on similar themes like puberty, anxiety and panic attacks, and the overwhelming desire to fit in, but does so in a more blatantly mature way. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Inside Out 2? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, now that we've met 10 of Riley's emotions, which emotion do you think should make an appearance next? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you get some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.